evening and welcome to World Today, a brand new show on DD India which will from here on be your daily window to the world. I'm Amritpal Singh. On the show this evening, the details on the nuclear deal standoff that existed, but now finally the talks are happening in Vienna, and an update on the protests in Myanmar against the military, and also the Home Minister Amit Shah is in Jagdalpur to visit the Jawans who were injured in the Saturday's Naxal attack. He took a review meeting. We'll talk about all that and much more, but first up, the headlines we are tracking at this hour. Iran and the United States to hold indirect talks in Vienna from Tuesday as part of broader negotiations to revive the 2015 nuclear deal between Tehran and global powers. The aim is to reach an agreement within 2 months, say officials. Oil prices edged down in early Asian trade on Monday after OPEC Plus agreed last week to gradually ease some of its production cuts between May and July. Decision comes after new U.S. administration called on Saudi Arabia to keep energy affordable for consumers despite demand concerns. Jordan Deputy Prime Minister says the prince has links with foreign parties over plot to undermine security. Military warns the king's half-brother to stop actions undermining stability. Head of Jordan's Senate says no one is above the law. Tensions within the royal household have been visible for some time now. The world battles COVID-19. More than 13 crore 19 lakh affected worldwide so far, while over 10 crore 62 lakh have recovered so far globally. Bangladesh goes into week-long lockdown from today to curb the spread of COVID-19. All public transport services, including roads and waterways and railways and domestic flights, will remain suspended. So those were the headlines, and let's begin with the big news. Iran and the United States will be holding indirect talks in Vienna from Tuesday as part of broader negotiations to revive the 2015 nuclear deal between Tehran and global powers. Tehran has ruled out face-to-face bilateral discussions, but the presence of both Iran and the United States in the Austrian capital will help to focus efforts to bring all sides back into compliance with the accord. The aim is to reach an agreement within 2 months. According to senior official with the European Union, who is the coordinator of the deal. Former U.S. President Donald Trump pulled out of the nuclear pact in 2018 and reimposed sanctions on Iran, prompting it to violate some of the accord's nuclear restrictions. At present, U.S. President Joe Biden wants to revive the agreement, but Washington and Tehran have been at odds over who should take the first step. Iran, China, Russia, France, Germany and Britain, all parties to the 2015 deal, held virtual talks on Friday to see how to progress. Guest corner, guest corner, guest corner, guest corner, guest video. Left, left. And let's understand how this nuclear deal, the Iran nuclear deal that was reached in 2015 between the P5+1 and Iran progressed. This is the timeline. It was in July 2015 that the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, or the JCPOA, as it is known, as the nuclear deal is known, was signed after negotiations between the P5, the B5, Germany and Iran. It was in 2015 July that JCPOA, or the deal, received unanimous Security Council endorsement because the P5 were a part of negotiations. In October the same year, the JCPOA enters into force, and after the world and Iran endorsed that, and it was next year, that's in January 2016, that the JCPOA started being implemented after International Atomic Energy Agency, or the IAEA, certified Iran's fulfillment of its commitments. It said that Iran is complying by it, and after that, the same year, sanctions relief followed because that was a part of the negotiation. And the US, but in 2018, in May 2018, the then US President Donald Trump decided to halt and pull out of the JCPOA. In reaction to that, Iran rolled back compliance with the JCPOA, and for a few months now, the two sides have been in negotiations on how to take this forward. And tomorrow, this Vienna meeting is happening, which will be an indirect meeting to restore the nuclear deal, or the JCPOA as it is known. And to talk more about that, I'll be joined by a guest on World Today. And I'm joined by Harshvi Pant on the show today, senior analyst. Dr. Pant, many thanks for joining on the show. How do you see this meeting that's scheduled for tomorrow?
These are very early days, and I think this is the first step, which obviously will be a very long, drawn-out process where America and Iran will be coming back to the table after so many years of estrangement under Trump. So clearly, the trust factor is missing, and at the moment, Iran, for example, has openly said that they don't want any direct communication with the Americans, because for them, the most important thing is that America should take off those sanctions that were imposed. So I think that to bring this JCPOA, the Iranian nuclear deal, back to the table would require a leap of faith from both sides. This is what will happen tomorrow in Vienna, would be the first step in a very long drawn-out process, where perhaps the trust can be restored between two sides, and that had completely gone out because of America withdrawing from JCPOA so unilaterally in 2018.
Okay, and what would be the role of the other powers that were part of negotiations of the JCPOA, because it happened between P5 and 1+1?
They are going to play a very important role, because it is because of them that tomorrow's meeting will be held. Americans and Iranians are not talking to each other directly, and it is therefore in a more multilateral setup where Europeans, Russians, and the Chinese would be present, that Iran would be engaging with America to almost revive the deal. The question, and therefore their role becomes very important. They'll be pushing the two sides into some sort of an understanding and bridging that trust factor that I was talking about. Because if the two sides, if Washington and Tehran are not on the same page, then it's a far greater responsibility as far as the third parties are concerned to come into the mix and to ensure that some amount of trust, either institutionally or informally, is developed, so that the process of negotiations can move forward. Because otherwise, if there is no other party in the mix, then I don't think this deal at the moment has legs to stand upon.
Okay, and Professor Pant, how do you see the Biden administration's departure from many of the policies of President Trump when it comes to engagement with, say, on issues of climate change, with it's back into the climate change negotiations. So is there a departure? But when it comes to Iran, we saw the airstrikes conducted under the Biden administration on what they called was Iranian militia operating in Syria.
Yes, see, there is a departure in a larger sense from Trump administration, where the focus is now on the instrumentalities of diplomacy, which is that for Biden administration, it is important that they send out a message of multilateralism, that their favored mode of operation, modus operandi, is multilateralism. We have seen that in the context of Quad, for example, in the Indo-Pacific. We are seeing that in the context of climate change, and we are seeing it in the context of JCPOA, where from the very beginning, the Biden administration was insistent that they would revive JCPOA. But at the same time, on the question of Iran, there is a lot of bipartisan consensus in Washington that Iran is actually becoming too powerful in the region, and American allies are feeling threatened. And the way Iranian proxies are operating across the Middle East is something that can be potentially detrimental to American interests, and it already is actually from their perspective. And therefore, the airstrikes were meant to signal to Iran that while Biden administration would be willing to come to terms with Iran on the nuclear issue, on other issues where American national security priorities are concerned, they would not hesitate to strike back. So almost a signal that Biden administration will be dealing with Iran from what diplomatically is called a position of strength, rather than a sense of vulnerability, that it is not a necessity for Biden administration to talk to Iran, but a strategic imperative in which both sides can perhaps see a win-win situation.
And from the Iranian perspective, Dr. Pant, how do you see Iran responding to it? While it's made, their foreign minister has made statements saying, well, we'll not be in direct talks or face-to-face or in-person talks with the United States. There are no talks scheduled between us. So if they take a very hard position, how far can the Biden administration go? So I'm asking you two questions. How would Iran look at it? Does it want to get out of the sanctions regime? Does it want to get back to the negotiating table, or does it still want to play hardball?
There is no doubt that Iran would like to come to some sort of an understanding, because the sanctions are really hitting hard the Iranian economy. We know what is happening to Iran's economic fundamentals, and there is a lot of dissonance within the Iranian system. But what Trump administration's unilateral withdrawal from JCPOA did was to further aggravate the situation for the Iranian moderates, which wanted a rapprochement with the US, and which thought that perhaps slight easing of sanctions would allow Iran to emerge as more of a normal economic actor in the region and beyond. But because Trump unilaterally withdrew from the treaty, the conservatives, the hardliners in Iran are now on top of this issue, and they do not. They are not interested in giving any space to the moderates when it comes to framing the American policy. And therefore, you saw how the Iranian foreign minister responded immediately, saying that it's not necessary for Iran and America to have any kind of conversation directly, because the first thing that Americans need to do to restore confidence is to remove all the sanctions that have been imposed. And I think they will go into this conversation saying precisely this, and they would like America to first show that they are really serious about these negotiations. And for Iran, for Tehran, nothing matters more than removal of sanctions at this point.
Okay, so you basically arguing that while the sanctions are hitting Iran hard, it cannot be seen as conceding much space to the United States, while on the other hand, the Biden administration has the same problem. If Iran doesn't seem a reasonable player or reasonable at the negotiations on the negotiating table, even Joe Biden does not have much elbow room to let Iran, because as you say, there is bipartisan consensus in the United States that if Iran plays plays hardball, then Iran needs to be reined in. Given that, how do we see further movement into these negotiations, even as they've set a 2-month deadline?
I think all diplomatic negotiations are what is known as a two-level game, where you are not only negotiating with the other side, with the other foreign side, but you are also negotiating within your own country. So from Tehran side, this dynamic between the conservatives, hardliners versus the conservative moderates is very important. From the American perspective, again, you have the Republican versus the Democrats, the Biden administration versus the Congress. That dynamic is going to be very, very important as the process of these negotiations moves forward. And without both of them being in sync, I'm afraid the negotiations can't really move forward. And therefore, as I said at the very beginning, that this is just the very start of a long drawn out process where two sides will be sussing out each other and seeing how far they can actually go under the present circumstances. Because even though one may not like what Mr. Trump did in 2018, what he did has changed the rules of the game for the region. There is also the additional factor of America and its allies in the Middle East, who are not very interested in this deal. You have the situation where Israelis and the Saudi Arabians and the UAE would not like this deal to move forward, or they are not very keen on Iran getting the kind of advantages out of this deal that perhaps is envisioned. So clearly there are multiple pressures on the system at the moment, and withdrawal has given a completely different arc in the Middle East, and it will be very difficult for the two sides to proceed. And therefore, I think they'll be proceeding very gingerly on every aspect and verifying every aspect, because there is also the question of Iran committing to its own enrichment process. There are reports where UN has said that Iran has enriched now uranium at a level which is much higher than what was accepted under the JCPOA. So clearly both sides want the other side to do much more at this point, and it would be interesting to see what happens at the actual negotiations, where the third parties will have to bring in their diplomatic heft and make sure that the process does not falter at the very beginning.
You say the third parties will have to bring in their diplomatic heft to see that these negotiations do not get derailed. Let's talk about the third parties. I'm interested in knowing from you about what the Russian and the Chinese position would be. The Chinese don't like the Americans and the Quad very much in the Asia Pacific. In fact, they've openly known their, not liking the situation they've openly let it be known. While Iran is not too far away from China, it wouldn't want, the Chinese wouldn't want the Americans having an overbearing influence there. The same goes for the Russians, because it has its own interest in the whole region, right up to the arc going right up to the to Syria or the Mediterranean. So how would these two players play out at the negotiating table?
Well, it is fascinating because, as you were pointing out, we are looking at increasing fault lines developing between China, Russia on the one side, and America and the West on the other. There are in fact reports that a major crisis might be building up in Ukraine once again, and China, of course, is saber rattling once again in the Indo-Pacific. The Quad issue, the Indo-Pacific issue, the Taiwan issue, all are becoming much more potent from these from the vantage point of China. But this is Iran issue is one where interestingly Russians and the Chinese do see some value in bringing Iran and America together. Part of the issue here is that Chinese have been suffering because of the sanctions. While they have become emerged as a most important partner for Iran in recent years, they have been taking up the space that has been vacated by countries like America and Western Europe. We have recently had the China-Iran defense cooperation agreement with very significant ramifications if it gets operationalized. The Chinese also have not been able to take full advantage of the the economic space that Iran presents. So from their perspective also, there is some incentive. If relations between Iran and America gets rationalized, if the sanctions get lifted, then China can do even more business with Iran much more effectively than perhaps they are able to do right now. And Russia would be able to moderate its actions in the region as well, because Russians and the West are also competing in the Middle East at the moment through their proxies, which is taking increasing toll on Russian position in the region and beyond. So clearly all these countries have incentives, including the Western Europeans, for example, who are leading this charge right now. And this is a unique issue on which multiple sides converge. But whether that convergence is enough for an operationalization of a larger nuclear pact compared to, say, 2015, and this is 2021, where things have changed dramatically, that remains to be seen. And therefore, tomorrow's conversation will be so much more important than anything that has happened in the past.
The world will be closely watching that negotiating room in Vienna. Many thanks, Professor Pant, for joining us and being on our show. Thank you. And let's change tack and get you some news from the Asian continent. Let's begin with Bangladesh. Bangladesh has gone into a week-long lockdown from today to curb the spread of COVID-19 infection. All public transport services, including roads, waterways, railway and domestic flight have been suspended. Every office and court is closed during this lockdown, but industries and mills will continue their operation, but on rotation with much lesser staff. Many rushed to leave the capital Dhaka yesterday in hope of getting to their hometowns as the shutdown of business leaves them with little to do in the city. Bangladesh has reported, remember, a record of 7,087 new cases in the past 24 hours. With the new cases, the tally has reached in that small country to a relatively large figure of 6,37,364. The country reported 9,266 deaths due to COVID-19 so far. And the Bangladeshi officials on Monday recovered 21 bodies from the Shitla Khasya river after a ferry collided with a cargo vessel and sank yesterday, killing at least 26 people. Relatives gathered at the riverbank to search for their loved ones as divers and a large plane worked nearby. The ferry was carrying around 50 passengers and it had sunk on Sunday just after it departed from the industrial Narayanganj district, which is about 20 kilometers off Dhaka, to Munshiganj. The police and officials have said that some of the passengers managed to swim ashore. Salvage operations had been hampered by a storm the previous night. The boat was packed with people rushing to leave the city of Dhaka, after government announced the week-long nationwide lockdown from today to tackle a spike in the COVID-19 cases. And talking about Indonesia, evacuations are underway in full swing. People who have been rescued are thanking their stars. The search for missing ones is on. People are praying for their loved ones and waiting eagerly for their arrival. Authorities are leaving no stone unturned for their rescue mission. And the visuals.
These are the visuals of flash floods and landslides in a cluster of islands of southeast Indonesia. Some lost their lives and thousands have been displaced and many are still missing. Floods and landslides were triggered by tropical cyclone Seroja. Several bridges collapsed, trees fell and blocked some roads in Indonesia, and at least one ship sank in high waves triggered by the cyclone, and all this complicated search and rescue operation. The Seroja cyclone, which triggered the floods, hit southwest Timor Island in the early hours of Monday, according to Indonesia's weather agency. Evacuations are underway in full swing. These people who have been rescued are thanking their stars. Search for missing ones is on. People are praying for their loved ones and are waiting eagerly for their arrival. Authorities are leaving no stone unturned in their rescue mission. These visuals are actually describing what exactly happened. The sea is eating away parts of Indonesia's coastline and there's little that can be done to protect it. Farmers can only wait and watch. Their paddy fields are swallowed by the waves, which are emboldened by rising sea waters and climate change. But along the same coast, in an area not so far away, there is hope. Mangroves have been planted in Indramayu to form a natural levee which protects the coastal areas from strong waves and typhoons. Many of the naturally occurring mangrove forests were chopped down by coastal communities in the past to clear the way for fish and shrimp farms and for rice fields. Indonesia has about 3.3 million hectares of mangrove, more than 6 lakh hectares of which are in critical condition, according to the Peatland and Mangrove Restoration Agency. Data from the country's forestry ministry from 2017 showed that over 1.8 million hectares of mangroves in the country were damaged. With Bureau Inputs, World Today Desk, TD India.
And the political rebellion in Jordan is brewing still. Jordan's Prince Hamza bin Hussein has said that he will keep communicating with foreign powers. The military and the government there says that Hamza was trying to destabilize Jordan and was trying to revolt and unseat the king of Jordan.
After Myanmar, Jordan is also witnessing political crisis. Tensions within the royal household has been visible for some time now. Former Crown Prince of Jordan is accused of trying to mobilize tribal leaders against the government. Jordan's Deputy Prime Minister Ayman Safadi said on April 4th that King Abdullah's half-brother and former Crown Prince, Prince Hamza, liaised with foreign parties over a plot to destabilize the country and had been under investigation for some time.
As part of comprehensive investigations conducted by the Jordanian armed forces, the Arab Army and the General Intelligence Department, as well as the Department of Public Security, the security agencies have looked into the long-term activities and movements of Prince Hamza bin Al Hussein, Sharif Hassan bin Zayed, Bassem Ibrahim Abdullah, and other figures, and target the stability and security of the country. The investigations monitored interference and calls, including calls with the foreign parties regarding the suitable timing to start steps to shake the security of the steady Jordan.
Jordan's military has told Prince Hamza bin Hussein to halt actions targeting security and stability. In a statement published by the state news agency, the military said the warning to Prince Hamza was part of a broader ongoing security investigation in which a former minister, a junior member of the royal family, and unnamed others were detained. Prince Hamza said in a video recording he was under house arrest and had been told to stay at home and not contact anyone, but Army Chief Yusuf Huneti denied reports. Meanwhile, the head of Jordan's Senate said no one is above the law and that the events that transpired on are being adequately dealt with by the authorities.
There is no one above the law, no one. According to the Jordanian constitution, there is a high regard for the law in the Kingdom of Jordan. What happened yesterday has been dealt with. The Jordanian state will encounter with all its force anyone who wants to harm the security and stability in this country.
Jordan, whose royal family traces its lineage back to Prophet Muhammad, has been ruled since 1999 by 59-year-old Abdullah II, the oldest son of the revered late King Hussein and his second wife, the British-born Prince Muna. Hamza is the son of Hussein and Queen Noor, his American-born fourth wife. Widely considered Hussein's favorite child, Hamza was made Crown Prince of Jordan in 1999, the year of the former king's death. At the time, however, Hamza was seen as too young to be named Hussein's successor, and Abdullah took the throne. Abdullah stripped Hamza of the Crown Prince title in 2004, giving it to his own son. This was seen as a blow to Queen Noor, who was hoping that her son would become the king one day. Hamza, however, remained a popular figure of Jordan's royal family, bearing an uncanny resemblance to his father, and was seen as modest and religious. With Bureau Inputs, World Today Desk, DD India.
And during the corruption trial of Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, a prosecutor alleged that Netanyahu made illegitimate use of his power and saw favors as currency. Netanyahu, however, has denied any wrongdoing. The hearing comes as Israel's president meets parliamentarians to ask whom they support to form the next government following last month's election. Malaysia's Court of Appeal on Monday began hearing a bid by former Prime Minister Najib Razak to set aside his conviction on corruption charges in a case linked to a multi-billion-dollar scandal at state fund. Najib, who was voted out in a historic 2018 election, faces several trials over allegations that $4.5 billion was stolen from One Malaysia Development Berhad, a state fund that he co-founded in 2009. He has pleaded not guilty to all charges. Last year, Najib was sentenced to 12 years in jail and a $50 million fine was imposed after he was found guilty of criminal breach of trust, abuse of power and money laundering for illegally receiving about $10 million from SRC International, a former 1MDB unit. The sentences were state pending an appeal. Vietnam's National Assembly confirmed Pham Minh Chin's a career security official as the Southeast Asian country's next prime minister at an official ceremony on Monday. 62-year-old Chin was the sole nominee put forward by the ruling Communist Party for a post at a Congress earlier this year. He won 96.25% of the vote at Monday's National Assembly vote. He was formerly the head of the party's Central Organization Commission, which has long reach across the party ranks, as well as Deputy Minister of the Ministry of Public Security, the agency that's tasked with everyday policing, the monitoring of dissent and surveillance of activists. as well as espionage overseas. The move completes the 5-yearly renewal of Vietnam's top 4 positions as it looks to maintain economic growth, keeping the corona pandemic at bay and balancing relations with Beijing and Washington. The United States Special Presidential Envoy for Climate Change, John Kerry, touches down in India this evening. He will meet several union ministers as well as representatives from the federal government, the private sector and NGOs for consultations on increasing climate change, climate ambition ahead of the Leaders Summit on Climate scheduled for April 22nd and 3rd. According to a U.S. Embassy spokesperson, Kerry will focus on mitigating fossil fuel use in India and increasing low and zero carbon investments. This is what the Ministry of External Affairs spokesperson Arindam Bagchi had to say about the visit.
The U.S. Special Presidential Envoy on Climate Change, John Kerry, will be visiting Delhi from 5th to 8th April. The purpose of his visit would be to discuss this forthcoming Climate Leaders Summit, as well as climate issues in general in the context of the 26th Conference of Parties of the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change, which is to be held later this year, the 26th COP. We expect that during his visit, Mr. Kerry will be interacting with several ministers, including External Affairs Minister, Ministers of Finance, Petroleum and Natural Gas, Environment, Forests and Climate Change, Power, and New and Renewable Energy.
And Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov is also coming down to India this evening. He's arriving at about post 9 on a 2-day visit. He'll hold talks with External Affairs Minister Dr. S. Jaishankar. During the visit, the External Affairs Minister and Sergei Lavrov will discuss a host of issues relating to bilateral ties. The emphasis will be on upcoming India and Russia annual summit as well as implementation of outcomes of the 20th Russia-Indian summit held in September 2019 at Vladivostok. The India and Russia annual summit was postponed last year because of the COVID pandemic. Also on the agenda will be interactions in the UN, the SCO and BRICS as well as the RIC. India is currently the chair of BRICS. The Asia-Pacific region and Afghanistan may also come up for discussions. All right, oil prices edged down in early Asian trade on Monday after OPEC Plus agreed last week to gradually ease some of its production cuts between May and July. Brent crude futures for June fell by 16 cents or 0.2% to $64.70 a barrel, while the United States U.S. West Texas Intermediate crude for May was at $61.32 a barrel, down 13 cents. Or 0.02%. Both contracts settled up more than $2 a barrel after OPEC Plus decision on optimism about energy demand after U.S. President Joe Biden outlined a $2 trillion infrastructure spending plan. The Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries, Russia and their allies, a group known as OPEC Plus, agreed to ease production curbs by 350,000 barrels per day in May. Another 350,000 barrels per day in June and a further 400,000 barrels per day or so in July. The decision came after new U.S. administration called on Saudi Arabia to keep energy affordable for consumers despite demand concerns as parts of Europe remained under lockdown, while Japan could expand emergency measures as needed to contain a new wave of coronavirus infections. Under Thursday's agreement, OPEC Plus cuts would be just above 6.5 million BPD from May, compared with slightly below 7 million BPD in April. And talking about some news from India, Union Home Minister Amit Shah on Monday held a review meeting with Chhattisgarh Chief Minister Bhupesh Baghel and top officials of security forces in Jagdalpur over the Naxal attack. Speaking to news persons, Amit Shah assured the countrymen that this battle against Naxalism will be intensified and taken to its logical conclusion. He added that both the central and state governments are working in tandem on two fronts, that's intensifying development works in tribal areas and the fight against armed groups.
और रिव्यू मीटिंग के अंदर ये लड़ाई की गति किसी भी तरह से कम न हो, ये सुझाव अफसरों की ओर से ही आया, जो बताता है कि हमारे जवानों का मॉरल अभी भी इंटैक्ट है और आगे बढ़ा है। और मैं देश को विश्वास दिलाना चाहता हूं कि लड़ाई रुकेगी नहीं और गति के साथ आगे बढ़ेगी और इसको हम अंजाम तक ले जाएंगे। ये लड़ाई में अंत में नक्सलवादियों के खिलाफ हमारी विजय निश्चित है।
The Home Minister said that the government stands shoulder to shoulder with the families of the martyrs in this time of crisis.
जो जवान शहीद हुए हैं उनके परिजनों को भी मैं ये बात कहना चाहता हूं कि आपके भाई ने, आपके पति ने, आपके बेटे ने जो देश के लिए सर्वोच्च बलिदान दिया है उसको देश कभी भुला नहीं सकता। मैं भारत सरकार की ओर से आपको इतना ही कहना चाहता हूं कि संकट की, दुख की इस घड़ी में पूरा देश आपके साथ खड़ा है और आपके परिजनों का जो बलिदान है वो व्यर्थ नहीं जाएगा। इन्होंने जिस उद्देश्य के लिए अपना सर्वोच्च बलिदान दिया है वो उद्देश्य को हम जरूर सिद्ध करेंगे।
And earlier, the Home Minister and Chhattisgarh Chief Minister paid tributes to 14 security personnel who lost their lives in the Naxal attack in Jagdalpur. Amit Shah laid a wreath at the coffins of the martyrs. Remember, in Saturday's attack, 22 martyrs from the security personnel were killed or they were martyred in an ambush laid down by the Naxals. In this ambush, some Naxals were also killed. And my colleague Nandita Dagar now joins me. Nandita, first of all, this review meeting that the Home Minister and the Chief Minister of Chhattisgarh held with the senior security officials. Give us a sense of what transpired there.
Yes, the meeting that took place yesterday in Delhi, immediately after the Chief Minister had landed had cut short his visit and landed in Delhi. He had held a meeting with the top brass of the Home Ministry and the top leadership of the CRPF along with the Intelligence Bureau. The director of the Intelligence Bureau. Here in Chhattisgarh, the meeting that he has had in Jagdalpur, as well as he's gone to the camp, the CRPF camp, from where this police CRPF police party had embarked on this mission. He's actually visited ground zero. So here he will be meeting with the leadership, the local leadership of the CRPF in charge of Bastar, and crystallizing the plans for how to take revenge for this attack, because although there have been, as the Chief Minister of Chhattisgarh has said, that there have been significant casualties on the side, on the Naxal side also, the enemy side also, but there are several who have fled away and they have to be hunted down and eliminated or neutralized. That is what the Home Ministry is now planning to do in the short term. In the medium to long term, of course, the counter Naxal operations will continue, and the Home Minister, Mr. Amit Shah, has already clarified that the entire procedure of Saturday, the ambush, the leaving of the police parties, everything will be scrutinized very, very closely, and if there are any lapses, they will be worked upon. Having said that, this is the biggest Naxal attack and the largest number of casualty figures that the Indian side, that is the CRPF, has sustained in this year. We used to see these kind of big figures in the 2009 and 2010s, because that was when very huge casualty figures, and after that due to the proactive approach of not just the central government but also the local government of Chhattisgarh and places, the red corridor has shrunk so much, and there are only 2 or 3 districts, the Kanker, Dantewada, Bastar, and of course some districts in Jharkhand where the Naxals are confined to. And this attack certainly was a effort from their side to actually register their presence. And the home visit of the Home Minister not just to the police lines in Jagdalpur but also to the place where the encounter took place, notwithstanding his personal security, his personal safety, really sends a message to not just the countrymen, to assure them that the Home Ministry is on top of the situation and will absolutely will focus on the job at hand. Secondly, this will also be a message to the Naxal leadership because this is very rare that
absolutely. The Home Minister in fact has said, Nandita, that the fight will be taken to its conclusion. Nandita, many thanks for joining us and giving us that update. Thank you. And let's now take a look at updates on COVID-19 from across the world. Cases of COVID-19 globally have crossed the 13 crore mark. More than 13 crore 19 lakh people worldwide have contracted COVID-19 so far, while over 10 crore 62 lakh have recovered from the virus. The deadly virus has so far claimed more than 28 lakh 67,000 lives. The United States remains the worst affected country by the coronavirus. The country has reported more than 3 crore 14 lakh COVID-19 cases. Over 5 lakh 68,000 fatalities are reported in the US so far. And world number 1 Ashley Barty retained her Miami Open title after opponent Bianca Andreescu was forced to retire injured in the second set of the summit clash. Former US Open champion Andreescu lost the opening set 6-3 and was then broken twice to fall 4-0 in the second to world number 1. More in this report.
World number 1 Ashley Barty successfully defended her title at the Miami Open women's single draw as Canada's Bianca Andreescu had to retire from the final when the Australian was up by 6-3, 4-0 due to a right foot injury. This is the 6th time a player wins back-to-back titles in Miami. With this result, Barty reaches a 12-match winning streak in the Magic City. The draw had 19 of the top 21 women in the world. The Australian took the lead from the beginning, getting a break to lead 3-0. Andreescu won 2 games in a row, but Barty got another break in the 6th game. She held that advantage until the 9th game when she served to clinch the first set in 36 minutes. In the second set, the world number 1 broke Andreescu's serve in the first game and then confirmed. During the third game, the Canadian fell in the middle of a point after twisting her right ankle. She ended getting her serve broken and down by 3-0. After receiving medical treatment during the changeover, the Canadian decided to get back on court, but Barty confirmed her serve to open a 4-0 advantage and she retired due to her injury. When they were at the net, the Australian said that she felt for her and hoped she will get back on track. For Andreescu, it was the second time playing on American soil after winning the 2019 US Open title, her first ever Grand Slam. During the week at Hard Rock Stadium, 4 out of her 5 matches went to 3 sets, including the semi-final against Greece's Maria Sakkari, in which she was 4-2 down in the decider. Besides winning for the second time here, Barty also celebrates the confirmation as world number 1 after the tournament, as rival Naomi Osaka did not reach the semi-final. This is her second title of the season after getting the crown at the Yarra Valley Classic in Melbourne, Australia. After Miami, Barty will start the clay season in Charleston and then move to Europe, where she will play in Stuttgart, Madrid and Rome. But she will always have great memories of Miami. Sports Desk, DD India.
And let's now take a look at what else made news around the world.
Europe European Union Council President Charles Michel called for the departure of all foreign fighters from Libya during his visit to the capital city of Tripoli on Sunday. He urged the Libyan political and armed factions to seize the unique opportunity to build a sovereign, stable and prosperous country. Calls for foreign fighters to depart have grown in recent weeks. According to the United Nations, some 20,000 mercenaries and foreign fighters remained in the North African country in early December. Also, a January deadline for their withdrawal was largely ignored. Pope Francis urged countries in his Easter message on Sunday to quicken distribution of COVID vaccines, particularly to the world's poor, and called armed conflict and military spending during a pandemic scandalous. This has been the second year in a row that Easter papal services have been attended by small gatherings at a secondary altar of St. Peter's Basilica, instead of by crowds in the church or in the square outside. Pope praised medical workers, sympathized with young people unable to attend school, and said everyone was called to combat the pandemic. Francis called for peace in several conflict areas in Africa, including the Tigray region of northern Ethiopia and the Cabo Delgado province of Mozambique. A leak at a wastewater reservoir at the site of a defunct phosphate plant south of Tampa forced the evacuation of hundreds of homes and threatened to flood the area and Tampa Bay with polluted water. Worsening of a week-old leak in the containment wall of the 480 million-gallon Piney Point wastewater reservoir prompted Florida Governor Ron DeSantis to declare a state of emergency over concerns of the possible collapse of stacks of phosphogypsum waste, primarily from fertilizer manufacturing at the plant. Amid the heightened threat, Manatee County Public Safety Department expanded an evacuation order to hundreds of homes in the surrounding area. Florida's Department of Environmental Protection Agency Secretary Noah Wallenstein has said that the potential environmental disaster's primary threat is to human health. Thousands of police officers were deployed across the Paris region on Sunday as France entered its third national COVID-19 lockdown. Last week, the government announced that alcohol consumption in certain public places would be banned and that police will tighten enforcement of the rules as the new lockdown kicks in. Recovery efforts continued in Taiwan on as engineers moved a train carriage from the tunnel where 50 people died in a derailment on Friday. Teams have been working round the clock to remove the wrecked train from inside the tunnel and to search for more bodies. Officials warned that the death toll could rise. In the island's worst rail incident in 7 decades, 50 people have been confirmed dead after the packed express train carrying almost 500 passengers and crew slammed into a truck and derailed near the eastern city of Wallin on Friday.
And today is the 5th of April. Let's take a look at the major happenings that took place on this day in history.
On this day in the year 1792, George Washington exercised the first presidential veto of a congressional bill. The bill introduced a new plan for dividing seats in the House of Representatives that would have increased the amount of seats for northern states. On the same day in 1843, Queen Victoria proclaimed Hong Kong to be a British Crown colony. The island was ceded by the Qing Empire in the aftermath of the war in 1842. In 1856, on this day, educator and reformer Booker T. Washington was born in Franklin County. He became an important spokesperson for African American community at the turn of the 20th century. On the same day in 1951, Julius and Ethel Rosenberg were sentenced to death for giving away atomic secrets to the Russians. In 1955, on this day, Sir Winston Churchill resigned as Prime Minister of Britain due to failing health, although he remained an MP until 1964. On the same day in 2009, North Korea launched the Kwangmi-Ongsong-2 rocket, prompting an emergency meeting of the United Nations Security Council. On this day in the year 2010, in a televised rescue, 115 Chinese coal miners were freed after spending 8 days trapped in a flooded mine, surviving an accident that had killed 38.
And let's now take a look at some stories that did not make it to the headlines but were interesting stories in our segment that we call Beyond Headlines.
Domestic tourism is warming up in Vietnam after a long period of stagnation due to COVID-19. Along with the task of ensuring people's safety amid the pandemic, localities across the country are preparing for the summer. The Vietnamese province of Quang Ninh has a number of attractive new tourism services that are being offered to visitors for the upcoming holidays. Music is like a miracle. Dancing athletes, despite of being vision impaired, expertly showcasing beautiful choreography. A dance tournament was held in Hanoi, Vietnam to give visually impaired dancers a place to demonstrate their skills and talents in dance. These visually impaired athletes studied for 3 years and medals have become a source of light for these athletes. Wuxong Sports Center, which is the venue for 2022 Beijing Winter Olympics, held an ice hockey game with audience attendance on Sunday to test its readiness for the upcoming Winter Olympics. Spectators were required to present a green code to verify their health status and travel history at the entrance. The Beijing 2022 Olympic Winter Games will be staged from February 4th to 20th next year, with the Paralympic Winter Games following on March 4th to 13th. A cherry blossom festival is taking place for the first time in 2 years in Japan's northeastern town of Tomioka, near the site of the 2011 Fukushima nuclear disaster. The town's Yonomori district is renowned for its 2.2-kilometer stretch of about 570 cherry trees. The annual festival resumed in 2017 after an evacuation order was partially lifted but was cancelled last year due to the coronavirus pandemic. Thousands of runners took part in a 5-kilometer race in Moscow Sunshine, an event organized to mark the start of spring. According to the organizers of the race, April, more than 5,000 people took part, which exceeds the usual numbers recorded before the outbreak of coronavirus. The first national saffron exhibition is being held in the Algerian western province of Oran, with 28 provinces taking part in showcasing their successful experiences in the production of the red gold. This event is organized in collaboration with the Direction of the Agricultural Services and the Chamber of Agriculture in the province of Oran in western Algeria. The exhibition sheds light on a strong participation of women versed in the production of this spice. Wearing an eye-catching rhino head hat and a box labelled Dongjeng Ke Liling or Fairy Tales in Bahasa, Indonesia, environmental activist Samsudin visits villages to teach children about coastal erosion and how mangrove trees can help preserve the environment. The 50-year-old recently brought his stories to Indramayu, one of the areas in the country which has suffered the most severe erosion damage due to the loss of mangrove swamps, which act as a natural levee against strong waves. The Latvia Fund for Nature's white-tailed eagle cam showed female eagle Milda flying the nest, yet to return to her eggs hours later. Milda's partner Raimis reportedly left the nest days ago and has not returned since, causing concern over his safety. Such a significant delay in his return may signal that he is either injured or dead. Christian denominations that follow the Western calendar in Syria celebrated Easter on Sunday. The day marks the resurrection of Jesus Christ. People celebrated the day in Syria by holding prayers and masses in the churches and places of worship while taking all the precautionary measures related to combating coronavirus. Germany's Sorbs, one of Europe's oldest and smallest minorities, celebrated Easter in traditional manner with singing at the break of dawn and costumed horseback processions through the villages of Lusatia, the watery flatlands in the southeastern corner of Germany, which are home to the Slav community. World Today Desk, DD India.
So that's it in World Today for today. We'll be back tomorrow evening, same time at 6 p.m. on DD India. Don't forget to tune in. World Today is your window to the world. Thanks for watching. Namaskar.